All right, good morning, everyone. This is Melanie Major from Able One. Welcome to the Able One webinar, How Disaster Recovery is Future-Proofing Businesses. Thank you all for joining us today. At Able One, our mission is to make great IT accessible. For over 30 years, we've been helping SMBs optimize their IT by providing a full range of IT solutions, including managed services for outsourcing IT functions to our specialized teams of experts, professional services for all kinds of IT projects and initiatives, and technology consulting and acquisition services to ensure you're acquiring the right technology for your needs. All of our services are delivered by a Canadian-based team of qualified IT professionals. We are a one-stop shop for IT solutions. So we provide everything from procurement, management, and optimization of your infrastructure and end user devices, to the design, migration, and management of your cloud, to complete security strategy and solutions for data protection. Today, we will be talking about disaster recovery. And we offer a variety of services related to DR, namely services for acquiring failover infrastructure, professional services for DR plan development and testing, and a full DR as a service solution complete with managed data replication, access to pay-as-you-go infrastructure in the event of a disaster, and support from DR professionals to minimize downtime during disasters. If you're interested in learning more about any of our solutions, please reach out to us anytime through our website. With this introduction complete, I will now turn today, the call over to today's presenters. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Melanie. So, Disaster Recovery 101, really, why DR matters. And when you go to look at the past versus now, and when I say the past, we can rewind to 2010, early 2000s, and then 1990. Clients expect the same experience they service to their customer base. And when I say clients, it's clients of the internal IT user group, and then that IT user group facilitates the service to the users, and then the users facilitate out, whether it be you're a construction company, out to your customers, and how they interact and transact business. But at the end of the day, in the past, there were only a handful of critical applications. Customer interaction was between 9 and 5, and basically, you could run a business on paper, and there was some level of tolerance for downtime. Now, given the ever-connected world of IoT, having access, work coming home with you with your cell phone, remote work being a huge thing now with the ever-existing pandemic, there is zero excuses for downtime, and this is driven by the experience of the user. One of my, I guess, best examples or analogies would be, you look at it from a COO or a CFO, they wake up and they don't have, or they get into the office and they don't have access to their email or one of the critical files and folders that they've been working on for the last month for the end of Q1. They would have the same visceral reaction a teenager would have if they can't access their Instagram app. They want it now. There's zero tolerance for delay, and really through this delay and not being able to facilitate and transact business out to the market, it begins to tarnish the brand, and that brand is associated with a poor user experience. So why DR matters? Businesses need to manage all levels of disruption, and it's not, what I'm talking about isn't just a natural disaster, fire, flood, or ransomware attack. I would define it as one's ability to transact or to continue to transact business out to the market. And it's not just for a worst case scenario, it's enabling the business to become more agile on a day-to-day basis. Faster file and folder recovery, mobility with your apps and virtual machines, having complete oversight of multiple networks, being able to fail in and out of the cloud, being able to restore files within seconds versus having to scroll through endless backups. So It's really accelerating the business on a day-to-day basis. And there are two delineating, we'll call it, options here. It's planned versus unplanned. And planned or downtime comes in many forms. So you begin to look at disaster recovery. So disaster recovery is associated with infrastructure failures, natural disasters, ransomware, but operational recovery, user errors, file deletion, and corruption, that's a day-to-day basis, being able to recover from those in second-by-second basis. And then you go to look at the long-term retention policies of backups. Well, they're great because they address legal requirements and they address compliance, but they don't accelerate the business on a day-to-day basis. And through proper planning, you can begin to address application mobility, cloud protection, cloud-to-cloud policies, and then begin to more or less become resilient and begin the digital transformation as a always on or always available customer experience. So this diagram represents the cost of downtime across 15 of the major sectors globally. These metrics were pulled by Forrester's, the global research firm. And really what this demonstrates is that no matter what, no one is immune to downtime and everyone underestimates its cost. Now, I understand you could be a law firm of 15 people or a law firm of 100 people or a large Fortune 500 financial institution, but regardless, it begins to scale down. The cost of downtime is scalable and needs to be considered very, very, very important. So really, how do you get started? And you want to open up with asking, where do I begin and how do I tackle the task? First and foremost, you need to define your current state. And the current state is your RPO and your RTO. Your recovery point objective is the most recent time in which the organization is able to recover from, and your recovery time objective is the amount of time required to recover from that specific point in time. So those are the critical parameters, or some of the critical parameters the business needs to define and then ask, okay, how can I improve and how can I innovate? One of the we'll call it examples is a steel organization or a steel manufacturing firm looks at its data a lot different than an engineering firm or a law firm or another construction company. Now, that doesn't mean the data isn't valued or more important or less important, but the organization's definition of hourly resilience on that data is different. So the business model is deriving that need for resiliency, but regardless, across the board, it's required. So when you look at a simple file recovery at a law firm, it's versus a steel manufacturer or a construction company, files and folders at law firms are not more critical or less critical, but they need to be always available because it's driven by intellectual property. Versus you have another example, fire. The law firm has a fire, everyone goes home, everyone needs to work remotely. If the steel manufacturer has a fire and everyone goes home, well, they stop transacting business because they're a singular location and they can't really roll or mill steel, right? So again, it's defined by the organization's business model and their need to be available. Basically, in summary, every single organization has a different RPO and RTO, but regardless, the data is valuable at the end of the day. So we begin to look at the past and the present and where we're going into the future. With this, more or less, the new digital age and how consumers absorb information today, it's really changed the requirements on uptime within the business. So your top tier applications in the past needed to have hours and minutes, and they were able to be down for a couple hours, if not more. Now there's seconds and minutes, seconds of data loss, and minutes of downtime, if not zero downtime and zero data loss across specific sectors. And it tiers down, right? So you look at the middle tier and the lower tier where days to weeks may not be acceptable, but regardless, you need to be available in seconds and you need to be up and running within minutes for the business to continue to transact business, because it reverts back to the consumer or customer or user experience and the always on availability. So we look at now what encompasses disaster recovery and what is the bare minimum. So we want to protect the revenue and the customer experience, as well as by having the data available on a second location or at a second location, having fast access to that data, meaning being available and being up and running and operational, and having available infrastructure within an acceptable amount of time, and a plan. You need to be able to define the plan to provide it and give it to your auditors, the senior management team, as well as the rest of the staff, because they won't know what to do when this happens. And one of the, we'll call it misconceptions is, well, I have backup. That's DR. No, it's not. Now, I'm not saying backup isn't relevant. No, it's very, very critical. But backup is not a DR strategy. Backup is a long-term way to store data and provide a historical reference point for auditors. DR accelerates the business. Backup does not accelerate the business on a day-to-day basis. So now we look at what encompasses optimized disaster recovery, or optimized DR, or what I would like to call IT resiliency. Having data available at multiple locations. Having fast access to your data anywhere, anytime. So in the event of a situation, the entire firm, organization, company can go home, work remote, work from a Starbucks, and have access to the VPN, have everything auto-tunneled, have the internet have your internet traffic traverse through a virtual firewall that's been set up in another cloud provider at another location, as well as having it fall within the financial framework that you've budgeted for. And what that looks like, it could be a capital expenditure, but majority of the time it's an operational expenditure, and making sure that falls within the framework. Finally, having an automated or an automatically orchestrated recovery plan, right? Having it fail over, having the software, having the IT do the work, right? The actual investment do the work versus you sitting there laboriously for hours on end. Finally, having support from an experienced crisis management team or the experts. Us at Able One, we've walked a mile in your shoes, and we walk a mile in your shoes on a day-to-day basis during these crises, during these events. And again, they could be file and folder recoveries, they could be VM or applications coming down, or full-blown site failures. But on a day-to-day basis, we work with our customers and we walk a mile in your shoes so we can assist and support you through these. And then finally, non-disruptive testing. We encourage you to test the solution in itself, as well as implement the plan and then test your plan before you go to adjust your existing one. Because a DR strategy or solution is only as good as its last test. And we encourage the testing of every solution. Now, really, once you've looked at disaster recovery or DR 101, you begin to look at IT resiliency. And then this is where I'll pass everything off to Derek, and he will begin to discuss about how Zerto is actually positioning and future-proofing your organization and the market space to become fully resilient.
Thank you, Tom. So it's 2020, isn't it? We're seeing technical debt from the last decade holding about a 10x based on what the future holds for us. This is pretty much a critical juncture, right? We're in 2020. What you do now to enable your business is going to follow you for the rest of the decade. So how can Able One help you? How can being powered by Zerto help you? Future-proofing. It's less of a cliche than it's been ever when you look at what Zerto gives you for capabilities with Able One service. So if we look at what customers are doing, what are their imperatives right now? They want to move to cloud. So companies are moving to cloud to find ways to innovate, to take advantage of lesser costs and all the scale that's available. Being in the cloud, all the promises of cloud that really were being built over the last 10 years are now actually being delivered, right? So you look at security, which is so important, and we'll talk a little bit about ransomware protection and what that means to you. Compliance, being able to do that testing that Tom talked about. You can test Zerto at any time during a boot storm on Monday morning. We don't impact production. So it's no agents, it's no impact on production. So that becomes a very valuable message. And then, when you're doing just DR, you're not keeping a bunch of storage at the local site. So there's much less storage requirements for you with this model. We're also seeing tremendous data growth, right? It's not like data growth is somehow getting under control. We've known about it for, a long time now, and we're really just accommodating it and not really stopping it. So that is what the future holds for the next 10 years, is that same type of data growth. And you need to be prepared for that. You also need to be prepared for the evolving technology, right? Zerto is hypervisor agnostic, it's storage agnostic. So if you're out acquiring new companies and they have 2 or 3 different storage arrays that don't match yours, you're going to be able to migrate them very easily to yours. You're going to be able to migrate them very easily into Able One's cloud. So this evolving technology, being able to go to all sorts of different platforms. So Able One will be able to enable you with Zerto to go to other platforms if you wanted to. So, the platforms that are supported add to the latent value of the product. So if the market changes, you're able to pivot on a dime and say, okay, well, now we want our application to be over there. And you're able to have that control. And the storage manufacturer isn't going to come put you over a barrel every 3 years, because you have the power to get out and the power to get away. And that becomes financial power, for your CEO, for your CFO, for your CTO. So what does it look like? We talk about 3 pillars a lot, right? Continuous availability obviously has become of the utmost importance, particularly in the 2020s. I think in the 2010s you might be able to get away with it a little bit, but at this point you need to be always on. The outages and disruptions that we know are coming, in the form of fires, disasters, hurricanes, etc. We're going to help you prepare for that. You can have your data in 3 separate locations with our one-to-many feature. So being able to put one VM or one application in 3 separate geos, it's really powerful when you're looking at how are you going to recover from a disaster. And chances are over the next 3 years, someone in this webinar is going to get hit by a disaster. I mean, it's the chances are 9 out of 10 probably, based on the number of people we have. And then, on top of that, so that was, always the traditional, why do you need DR, right? Just outages and disruptions. But, what Zerto has done over the past 10 years is packed all sorts of value into the product that goes above and beyond that original initial value proposition, right? So being able to protect from ransomware attacks, having seconds of granularity, which I'll show you in a little bit, in terms of being able to go back and recover to the point in time just before the ransomware attack and lose only seconds of information, which is, the RPO that Tom referred to. Our RPOs in our, in Able One's environment, typically going to be anywhere from 3 to 15 seconds. So, very minimal data loss in terms of a disaster when you look at that compared to what backup has been, and people using backup as DR. The value is here, and hopefully I'm going to be able to help you see that and unlock that for you. The data protection, so cloud management and data protection, we enable you to go to any cloud, to be able to see yourself in any cloud. And then, Able One obviously is going to be able to manage that for you. So, having a white glove service, not having to train all your employees to go on to every single cloud that pops up. I mean, it's really become untenable to manage your own IT, in the next decade, in terms of the number of platforms that are available, and where applications are probably going to want to go based on what the value is, based on what the performance is. So when you look at that workload mobility and being able to migrate well protecting. So if you're, migrating from, let's say you have 2 sites or 3 sites, and you want to get rid of 1 or 2 of those sites and use Able One site, you'll just fold those out one at a time, and you'll be able to migrate to the Able One cloud while maintaining protection. And once you're in the cloud there, you're protected. Eventually, once you start and maybe earn the trust of, Able One earns your trust with DRaaS, then suddenly, okay, this is probably a good idea now. And what we're seeing companies do is, let's put our production in our partner's cloud. We don't need to manage IT anymore. We don't need to spend all this money. This isn't part of our core business proposition or value. So let's put this in someone else's hands. Let's own IT as a service. Let's make this an OpEx cost instead of a CapEx cost. And you're suddenly running with high enterprise, and based on what they're doing and the model that they're going to. So the infrastructure refreshes, being able to migrate easily, consolidations and migrations, as I mentioned, over the next year and a half, 2 years, I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation in a lot of different market spaces based on what's happened in the market over this year. So being flexible and being able to migrate off any platform, off any array, off any hypervisor, gives you unbelievable flexibility and power in your everyday life. Testing and DevOps. So we have customers like a chip manufacturer that spins up 10,000 VMs into Azure every night between 2 and 4 a.m. with a spot instance, because it's the cheapest thing to do. But we're allowing you to test, to move databases into a testing bubble and work on them, to do patching, upgrades, that sort of thing, all in a safe space rather than in production, so that you can prove it out, merit it, and then bring it into production. The multi-cloud agility, I've kind of been beating the drum on that throughout what I've been saying. Cloud integration and migration, being able to move out in and out of any cloud near effortlessly and gracefully. Multi-cloud, hybrid cloud is really the strongest message, I think, in Canada right now. People are trying to define what that means for them, and I can tell you that it means something different for every individual, enterprise, small, medium enterprise. It really matters what you have, and it matters where you want to go. But I can tell you that Zerto fits very well into just about any situation, provided you're virtualized, to be able to embrace really this decade. So the other thing that you have is the analytics that Able One can provide you, across your different locations of where your data is. And then, we look here, I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, but this is, a look at our business resilience platform. And again, we have 3 pillars here, which here are continuous data protection, orchestration, and automation. So that's a big pillar for us, because we have both the replication engine and the orchestration and automation built in. So it's not like SRM, where you need a replication tool to go with the orchestration and automation, and it takes forever to install and upgrade, and it's very difficult to manage. This is very easy to manage. This is very easy to put the work onto Able One, to have them do this for you, so that you're not 6 months, a year down the road, and maybe not practiced in the ways of recovering, and you have a failure. So having a partner to be able to do these things with you, for you, is something that is just good business sense in the 2020s. And then the analytics, the control that can be provided for you, so the visibility across all the sites, being able to proactively manage all your data, understand where it is, what the usage is, how many CPUs, how much RAM you have, and everything. So we're going to give you all that information. The orchestration and automation gives you an RTO in minutes. We have RESTful APIs available. When you look at the multi-cloud, we talked about one-to-many. We often talk about the right cloud for the right workload, and being able to have that flexibility. The workload mobility, we can burst, we can scale, we can throttle. So, we have all sorts of methodology to minimize the amount of bandwidth that's being used over the wire. Now, specifically, we have a way to mark Windows page files and temp disks as temp disks in our system, so that we're only replicating that disk in the initial sync, and then we stop. So instead of replicating all those changes all the time like everyone else, we're having a tremendous economy in that process. So that does give us quite an advantage. The non-disruptive testing, as I mentioned, for compliance reporting, auditing, being able to present offsite clones for dev and test, and then the continuous data protection, right? Hypervisor agnostic, near synchronous. We scale out, so no matter how big your environment's going to get, Able One is going to be able to handle it. And then application consistency grouping in our virtual protection groups. So let's talk about why we need consistency, right? Applications are not fitting on a single server. They're not sitting on a single VM anymore. There are certain manufacturers out there that will tell you they can give you application consistency as long as it's only a single VM. But that's not going to work anymore, right? We need consistency because applications are growing more complex. They can span dozens of VMs. I've seen them, in my travels, over 100 VMs for a single application. So, think about the data and disks that make up that entire application. We put them all in one single virtual protection group. So even for, say your 3 VM application, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to want to bring that SAP application up to a consistent point of time, and it's not going to be one single VM you're doing that with. So that's one of the strongest value propositions we have. We can protect that virtual protection group across our journal, which can be up to 30 days, and then also across our long-term journal, which can be up to 7 years. So being able to protect consistently and also with application consistency if required, both for DR and for long-term retention. So, just taking a look at traditional DR ecosystems and what that looked like. I used to have the most fun talking about tape truck stories and tape truck tragedies and all the accidents and horror shows that happened with trucks filled with tapes of customers' backups. But it's not as relevant as it used to be, but we still see it occasionally. What we're seeing more likely is disk-based backup, which came along 2 decades ago, and we have traditional backup to the local site now in our 8.5 release, which was literally just released. So one of the things I will tell you is that our cloud service providers are on our U4 release. So they have the most stringently vetted code that is available from us. So that's something to be very aware of. There's no science fair tests here. That does happen in customers' environments, unfortunately. But when you have professionals you're working with and you're working with Zerto, you're going to find that you have a very refined process that you're walking through, that Able One leads you through in guiding you to analyze your environment, understand what you have, and then give you an idea of a roadmap on how you want to protect that, not just now, but how you're going to protect that, for the next 3 to 5 years, perhaps. So we see, we're protecting our tier 1 and 2 apps across with DR. We can do traditional backup to the local site for operational recovery and fast restores. We find that, that I think the number is 87%, where, it's just operational restores and, the rest is serious disasters. So having a tool that can make it very easy to do those restores is very valuable. So a look at what modern resilience ecosystems look like and leveraging the one-to-many feature from Zerto, we can put you to 3 separate Able One locations, right? So for the ultimate in resilience, having geo redundancy and not being on the same power grid, that was a mistake that we saw in the 2000s, in the aughts. You want to be outside of any disaster that's going to happen in any geo. So being able to put your data, having the availability of AWS and Azure, so that you can go global with it, and maybe you want to protect on another continent. How resilient do you want to be? That's something Able One's going to be able to help you work out. You're going to be able to use not only DR but also LTR, as we see here, and then we also have the ability to launch clones that you can run off to anywhere to be able to work on as well. So this type of architecture really is the new architecture that people are striving for. It's not always able to be done on the first go round, but having Zerto, like I said, the latent value that you have, you're going to be able to move your data in and between all these sites, and that's really powerful when it comes to not just your data, but your checkbook and how you posture yourself when you're negotiating with your vendors. Zerto is not one of the the big three, so we are sort of leveraging, wedging, ourselves against those manufacturers when negotiating. So minimizing impact. This is really one of our strongest stories. When you look at recovery, we have thousands of points of recovery when we're talking about even a 30-day journal. So that ability to go in to that granular restore point, not talking about 4 hours, not talking about 24 hours. My hometown was recently hit with ransomware. They were down for weeks and they couldn't figure it out. And it was pretty embarrassing. And really, that's what happens when you're not prepared. So having a partner that is going to get you prepared, walk you down that path, it gives you one throat to choke when something goes wrong, right? It's not going to be yours. It's going to be someone else's because you've done the due diligence to get the right partner to be able to operate this for you and not leave it to people that need to get trained on it and won't be doing it all the time. The point here, though, is that you can rewind and recover from any point in time in that journal. You can pull up an entire site. We can pull up applications in our virtual protection groups. We can pull up individual VMs from within that virtual protection group. So that virtual protection group isn't, you're not handcuffed in there. You can pull out, all the VMs but one or just one VM. So if you have a 2 terabyte VM and a 200 gig VM, you don't want to have to recover the 2 terabyte VM with that 200 gig VM. So you have the capability to get to that level of granularity. We can prescribe different networks and disks to different VMs within those virtual protection groups. So we're never bound by resources by that virtual protection group. That's simply for restoration to be able to get to those exact points in time and have an application to be able to be recovered properly. So this is a look at the data protection workflows for both the short-term retention, which is what we've done for the past 10 years, and then the long-term retention, which has been developed, I would say, over the past 8 years in multiple forms. But the way that we're doing it now has really changed the game because we're not impacting production. We're doing our long-term retention from the recovery site. So you'll be replicating to the Able One cloud, and then from the Able One cloud, that will happen. So, like I said, no impact on production. That recovery site's just sitting there and it's not doing anything a lot of the time. So why not use it for long-term retention and not have it be impactful on your production, which is really a sin in these, in this day and age to, be jamming your CPU on your production. So like I said, 86%, I think I said 87%, I was wrong. 86% are granular use cases in that short-term retention, pulling out a file or folder. The long-term retention, like I said, we can go out to 7 years. We can give you the compliance, dailies, weeklies, monthlies, yearlies. So all the same features and functionality that you love from your own backup, but done a much more efficient way and a much more futuristic way. And with that, I pass it back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Okay, so starting your journey, where do you start, right? That's the question, right? And you want to assess your current environment and the other environments that your application sit. So understanding the dependency on your applications or your dependency tree of your applications, understanding your processing dependencies, your AD and your DNS, your ability to load balance, evaluating your databases and the database design. Do you have MongoDB? Are you running Oracle? Do you just have SQL? What are the requirements? Are they highly transactional? Who knows, right? It's really going through the environment with a fine-tooth comb with us at Able One and understanding really what are the requirements and what we're trying to achieve here, and then the tiers of business continuity. Back to looking at that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. But regardless of it being tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, through Zerto, we're able to deliver an always-on experience to both the user and then the end customer. So then, DR planning in the current world, our current state as it is, right? It's business process driven, or really it's driven by the organization in itself and its business model. And then what are you trying to protect against, right? Are we trying to protect against natural disasters because I'm in a floodplain? Or am I looking at my financial institution and I'm protecting from ransomware? Really, it varies from organization to organization. But again, at the beginning of the presentation, no one really is immune. Someone, just like Derek said, someone at some point in this presentation is going to experience some form of downtime, and really we need to define what we're trying to protect against. And then defining the resiliency strategy. So you're, again, back to being application tiers. Do I already have an on-prem data center? Do I have a secondary location? Did I just buy that secondary location, right? So through Zerto, Zerto can already complement your pre-existing strategy. It's not a forklift upgrade. It's to fill the gaps in your existing data protection strategy. And with the evolution of Zerto and the disaster recovery or IT resiliency as a service, it begins to populate as your licensing structure begins to deteriorate. Zerto enables you to consolidate both from a licensing perspective as well from a cost perspective and an analytics perspective. You're kind of addressing three birds, one stone. And then you go to look at, okay, well, how do I validate the required ecosystem, right? Cost, capacity, network design, so on and so forth. That's by working with Able One. And again, like I said, we've walked a mile in your shoes and we do it on a day-to-day basis, right? We work with you on cost and capacity. We work with you on the network design. We work with you on BGP protocols, firewall failovers, right? The devil is in the details. How do you fail over the subnet, the re-IPing, your layer 2 network? The list goes on and on. But at the end of the day, the devil is in the details, and we at Able One are able to more or less validate what you're trying to protect, build an ecosystem for you, and then keep it within your costing framework. And then finally, your document recovery and the run book. So what is the process in which it's documented? And then as well as, okay, how do I recover small granular documents? Again, it reverts back to what Derek had explained to us in the beginning. Very, very simple. It's file and folder, it's application and VM, it's full site failure, right? It can address anything and everything, as well as improving on mobility across the entire network. And then finally, when you look at IT resiliency, I like to think it's continuous improvement. Let's keep making things better. Let's continue to innovate as a whole, as a sector, because I find with these new problems comes innovation, which then breeds new forms of thought process, and that new thought process helps the market as a whole. Question? Melanie, do we have any questions coming in?
So our first question is, how does Zerto protect against ransomware attacks, and how do you protect the replication?
Mm-hmm.
Derek,
I can answer that, Tom. Yeah, thank you. So protecting against ransomware attacks, we're a threat remediation tool, so we're not going to protect you from the actual attack. We can't put up a shield for that. There are lots of vendors out there that do that, but they're not perfect because there's a lot of money out there trying to get at people, and when that imperfection happens, you want to have a tool that can give you a granular recovery point that you can go back to, so that you can do the forensic analysis as quickly as you possibly can, understand exactly when that attack happened, and then roll back to an almost exact point in time before that attack happened. So we've seen that happen with our customers. Some of our customers have been attacked 4 times. I think that's the biggest story that we have, where they had originally been attacked. It cost them a fortune, and then they got Zerto, and then they were attacked 3 additional times. And instead of like the first time where it's like a resume generating event, you're giving each other high fives, right? It just changes, it flips the script on the ransomware attackers. They can't hold you over a barrel. You're not worried about how you're going to pay, whether you can pay, whether you're going to get your data back, whether you're going to make it public. You're just going to recover. In terms of protecting the replication itself, our components are encrypted for communication, and we also typically use a virtual private network for connectivity between points for security. Does that answer the question? I hope so.
Next question is, how is Zerto different from vSphere replication / site recovery?
Yeah. All right, I'm going to try and be diplomatic about this. So vSphere replication, obviously is, the vSphere replication tool. It's maybe you could call it enterprise class. And then to have it with Site Recovery Manager, which is just sort of an orchestration and automation tool that VMware will often give away for free because it's so complex. The people that like it are the people that have worked on it for 5 or more years because they actually know it. Typically what happens is it gets installed in an environment and they hand the customer a 100-page document that outlines what they need to do in case of a disaster, and it sits there and they just hope they don't get hit with a disaster. That's kind of, that was kind of what was happening between 2000 and 2015. They've improved the product considerably, since that time, but you're still looking at, longer upgrades. You're still looking at, a very long implementation period, a very long learning curve. The simplicity, the ease of use just isn't there. So, I hope that is a good diplomatic answer.
Yeah. So as we go through this, we appreciate all the questions. Those are some great questions. I actually would like to talk to you about, Derek, about a few of these ones. Really, when to choose drafts, right? I've already invested in physical infrastructure. When do I choose this, right? You are we'll call it you are the cloud architect for all of Canada. You validated us at Able One. I'd love to get your input on this.
Yeah, I mean, DRaaS really, there's no time not to choose DRaaS at this point. I mean, there's no reason to manage your own environment anymore. There's no reason to pay colo anymore. There's no need to have dedicated, resources working specifically for disaster recovery. It's really, it's one of those things where you might need it and you might not, but if you do, you need someone that's prepared. And that's really been, kind of the biggest gift to the customers that actually have gone with DRaaS is it's just one less thing to worry about that's way outside what your business typically is. These aren't IT businesses that are, having to have, an IT department that's pulling a third of their income, right? So DRaaS gives you a cost-effective solution. It moves you from CapEx to OpEx, and it's really, the modern way to do things. It's easy to find. We have a business case builder. We can give you the numbers, to show you what the total cost of ownership, what the return on investment look like. And it's pretty stunning when you're, looking down the barrel of renewing, a 3-year contract for a secondary site.
Yeah.
So and nobody's moving their primary storage over to the DR site anymore. It just doesn't happen. If you have a disaster with Zerto, you're going to be running on production grade storage, right? We're not throwing you onto someone's secondary box, that's not a primary storage vendor, but trust us, we're going to run your primary storage for you for extended periods of time. You're going to have production grade storage to run on in the event of a disaster for as long as you need to. So that's really another huge aspect, of where you get the value from. And in terms of, easy onboarding, Able One's going to make this process so easy, so professional for you. You're going to probably gain some insight about your environment that you didn't have all in one place, right? You probably could have gone and gotten it all, but it would have taken a long time. They'll come in and they'll give you, actionable business intelligence about your environment, help you plan and execute a disaster recovery strategy by designing your virtual protection groups. And, your SLA with Zerto isn't, your RPO. It's, how long is your journal? How long do you want to protect for? Do you want to be able to recover from, 4 hours, 24 hours? Sometimes 4 days if you want to be able to come back from a long weekend. And then you can also go to a backup strategy after your journal to be able to recover. So, one of the things I think that has been a big surprise this year is we're seeing some Trojan horse type ransomware attacks where, they're not being discovered for 2 and 3 weeks. And, if you have a 30-day journal, that isn't going to be a problem, right? That type of Trojan horse attack. There's certainly cost trade-offs that need to be calculated with that, but it is possible, right? And it is, the most advanced protection that you can provide based on granularity.
No, I agree. I mean, I've been working with you guys since 2011, and you're one of the most mature products on the market in this space. And it's interesting you brought up backups. I know we're jammed, we're limited for time here, but I mean, when people go to look at backups, they associate, I got to learn an entirely new GUI. I got to deal with new software. Would you be able to touch on the simplicity and really how Zerto could act as, well, let's not look at it from a forklift upgrade. Let's look at it from a complementary. Let's begin to address the existing holes, and then let's look at when that software renewal comes up. Okay, sure. Let's then evaluate Zerto as a blanketed approach.
Yeah, and that's something I think that's going to creep on the market over the coming year or two. I don't think, everyone's not doing this yet, but, you can consolidate DR, with the best virtual DR in the world, and, have an LTR solution to go along with that so that you have the most robust protection available in a virtual environment.
With that, I think we're going to conclude today's webinar. Thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you for attending. We hope you have a pleasant day.